Welcome, everyone. My name is Zach Parrish from Epic Games, and it is great to be here to talk to you this year about our ongoing digital human effort at Epic. To begin, let me recap some of the ground we've been covering in this exciting area of real-time graphics. You've all seen the kite demo that we did for GDC 2015. Back then, it was incredible to see a character of this fidelity with a fax-based facial rig, having rich animation controls and able to perform in real time. Up until that point, this had not been possible in a game engine. In terms of stylized characters, Fortnite continues to be an opportunity for us to push even further into the style and visual territory of high-end animated feature films. We again incrementally improved skin and subsurface scattering and experimented with stylized looks for things like the eyes and hair. With the facial rigs, we went much deeper into designing a rig that could achieve an even broader range of motion and utilized alembic caching to bring into engine a far greater number of deformations than would have been possible otherwise. Our Paragon and Special Projects teams have done tremendous work to refine the process of creating photoreal digital humans. Twin Blast, a character from our game Paragon, was an early example of this work that we released to the community a little over a year ago. Around that time, you may also remember that we partnered with Ninja Theory to help them realize Senua, the character from their game Hellblade. Both of these characters broke new ground by utilizing techniques previously employed only in high-end film effects. Additionally, we began to form a strong collaborative partnership between Epic Games and the leading companies in the world who are able to do this level of work in real time: Lateral and cubic motion. Now this year, we decided we wanted to push even further. Our goal was to take what we had done with Twin Blast and Senua and improve upon it, and to do it in VR. This was the new challenge for us leading into last year. And the result was a demo for SIGGRAPH 2017 called Meet Mike, featuring Mike Seymour of FX Guide fame, who worked with us as a model, reference, and performer. Using all of these evolving techniques for modeling and performance capture, Mike was created as a digital human who could interview guests in real time in VR. The research for this project was sponsored by Tencent, and they worked closely with us on the look development for Mike and also on our follow-up project. Siren. Siren is a full digital human, bringing together all of the latest scanning, modeling, rigging, and rendering techniques, and being performed and rendered in real time for a room of people who could interact and talk with her live on screen. Siren was the culmination of all of our digital human work and research up to this point. But just these past few months, we had an opportunity to push things even further. So we turned to a friend of ours who happened to be no stranger to digital recreations, an actor who many of you know, Andy Serkis. Andy was kind enough to allow the teams at Epic, Lateral, and Cubic Motion to once again measure, model, rig, animate, and render him using everything we'd all learned up to this point. The result is a project we've been excited to demo this year. Not only does it show a great example of both human and non-human photoreal character work, but also how animation can be shared between dramatically different characters when they share the same core architecture. Let's roll the video.
Tomorrow And tomorrow. And tomorrow creeps in this petty pace. From day to day to the last syllable recorded time. And all our yesterdays have lighted fools the way to dusty death. Out. Out! Brief candle! Life's but a walking shadow. A poor player that struts and frets his hour upon the stage, and then is heard no more. It is a tale told by an idiot, full of sound and fury, signifying nothing.
So with that, I'd like to give a brief overview of the topics we'll be covering today. First, we'll take a look at our approach to handling this data and the work that went into modeling and texturing the characters. We will then take a deep dive into the materials and new rendering technology that was used. Next, we will look at the character's rigging and facial setup. And finally, we'll have an overview of Livelink, our plugin to bring live animation data into Unreal Engine. But first, I'll be talking a little bit about our scanning and data acquisition process. So in order to achieve final results like the ones we're showing today, it all starts with the scanning and data acquisition process. We've been working closely with Lateral, who specialize in digital humans, and they've become one of our closest partners. And we've relied on them for the data acquisition and facial rigging we're talking about today. This was the actress Bing Ji, who we recreated digitally for the Siren project. The process we used to capture her likeness was similar to what is done for blockbuster movies. She is performed with hundreds of cameras and sensors suspended all around and able to capture details from every angle. For areas like the teeth, which aren't always visible, we even scanned her dental molds, as seen here. Similarly, for her head and face, we captured her performing 50 fax poses. Each pose helps us to isolate the movements of different muscle groups in the face. We also use the imagery from these scanning sessions to create physically accurate data for use in our diffuse, normal, specular, AO, and translucency maps. We also captured 4D reference, which is essentially a 3D model for every frame of a performance. For Siren, this provided us with great reference to compare the animation rig against. Cubic Motion would track the facial performance and drive Lateral's rig to try and hit the right pose. We could always compare the result of the animated rig to the 4D scan. With Andy, we captured even more. Here, you can see how much higher fidelity his 4D capture is. There was a reason for this, though, beyond just wanting good reference. We wanted to be able to actually drive the rig with his 4D capture data rather than just using it as a reference. This was going to require much more resolution than we had for Siren. Something you'll hear a lot about in this talk is microgeometry, and that refers to all of the incredible pore level detail. A huge part of making these characters convincing is being able to really capture the tiniest subtleties, including how pores squeeze and stretch as the face deforms. By capturing all of this incredible detail for every pose the actor makes for us, it allows us to blend and animate between all the different maps to create a convincing effect for every possible performance. Here's another example that shows even more clearly the way the micro detail changes as a person moves their face into different positions. Okay, so with that, let's move on to the modeling and texturing process and see how we can start to make sense of all of this data we just acquired. Our goal was to create digital doubles in order to research and improve our character pipeline. Whether it be modeling, shading, or animation, we needed to be able to compare results to real-world reference photography in order to properly vet our work. For the Meet Mike project, we started with the Mike Seymour dataset from ICT. Artists did not resculpt any parts of the character. They only added detail that was missed in the scan, such as behind the ears and under the eyelids. All artistically created changes were placed on their own ZBrush layer so they could be individually mapped or scaled. To fill in any areas that the cameras couldn't get to, we used scans from Texturing XYZ and Surface Mimic. Again, it's important to have these hand-placed layers on their own layer. Texture maps are a mix of scan-generated and artistically generated maps. The albedo is captured during scan time. For the albedo map, we project hair from the reference photography back onto the scalp and then clean up any areas that require it. Generally at Epic, we handle painting like this either with Mari or Substance Painter. Normal information consists of two maps. The base map is baked from our high poly model, which I'll refer to as the mesonormal. The second normal map captures the detailed microstructure of the skin, like all of the pore level detail. We also baked a thickness map to control forward scatter, which is a new feature that we'll talk about a little bit later. We baked an ambient occlusion map, and then also a cavity map from ZBrush, and a hair ambient occlusion for the scalp to provide control of the specular occlusion. And here you can see the assortment of specular masks and other maps that were used. For the real-time model, we had a generous poly budget when creating these characters. We knew early on that we wanted to use individual hair strands rather than cards, and that the poly count for those would probably be high. We weren't as concerned for the amount of polys we put into the face. There just had to be enough loops to deform realistically while still being at a reasonable level for our artists to work with. Final triangle count for these meshes varied between 40 and 43,000 triangles. The mesh needs to be aligned with the anatomical features of the face. For example, the radial flow around the mouth and eyes, loops that define the nasolabial fold, and a grid-like flow on the forehead. It's also very important to align the mesh edges with the baked normals. An example is along the nasolabial fold. You can get some pretty bad normal stretching, especially with a lower poly mesh, if this is not lined up well. Now, as a quick note, the same topology was used for Meet Mike and Siren, with Andy Serkis being the latest, and he had an updated version. Here's an image of the differences between the Andy and Mike meshes. You can see Andy is a bit denser around the neck and forehead, and the poles have been removed around the chin and sides of the nose. I'll wait, I hear cameras clicking. All of the hair for these projects was created with XGen. For the Meet Mike project, we used the interactive groom splines to shape and style the hair, along with a guide modifier. If at any point we needed control of individual strands, we could simply mask out the modifier. During the Siren project, we placed XGen curves by hand. Primitives were then converted into thin polygon strips. Face camera was turned off before conversion. All billboarding was handled in the engine, and all root tip variations, such as width taper, were also disabled in XGen, and this was handled in engine as well. The hair strands were layered over cards for Siren. They originated from the center part in her hair and the front and temporal region of her hairline. Layering it in this way helped hide the card transitions where they met the skin and made sure we got the most coverage out of our hair strands. We did this to reduce poly count for Siren's longer hairstyle. Also, multiple UV sets were used to control hair attributes. So here are the 3 UV sets that were used for the hair. The first UV set on the left is auto-generated by XGen as long as the tiling option is turned off. Here, each UV shell is overlapping, and we use this to control global attributes like root to tip, width, and color. So if you wanted to change the color of the hair from the root to the tip. The middle is UV set 2. This second UV set gives regional control for things like hand-painted masks, or if we wanted to add a noise for color variations, we could do it here. We had some tricks to generate this second UV set. The map consists of the hair's UVs transferred directly from the scalp UVs. So to an artist, this would be like you could paint a map directly on the scalp, and that would represent the hair color coming from that portion of the scalp. UV set 3 is just for baked AO, ambient occlusion. This was created just using the layout tools in the UV editor and had to be very large to have enough pixels for a decent bake. This slide shows the different layering and mesh pieces that comprise the whole of Siren's hair. So the first layer, being cards, are kind of hidden under the other layers. The next layer is the majority of the strands that would cover, that would overlay and hide the bulk of the cards. So we put the hair strands on top of the cards. The third layer consisted of flyaway hairs. So these are just strands that break up the mass of the hair and also break up the silhouette. And the final layer was the transitional hairs on the back of the neck and at the front of the hairline. Next, we will cover the look development process for real-time digital humans. Our goals, as mentioned before, were to use high-quality scan data to generate a real-time CG human. We would use this to improve rendering technology and our process for creating skin, hair, eyes, and teeth. In this portion, we'll cover the setup for our look dev environments. We will talk about some upcoming rendering improvements for Unreal Engine 4.20. And we will cover some of the material techniques we use to make these projects possible. So let's start with the look dev environments. First, it's important to set your scene up so that it matches the reference photos. We do all of our look dev in sRGB linear color space. All photos are converted to sRGB linear. We then turn off the tone mapper in UE4 and only use sRGB linear. This gives a nice one-to-one reference environment. For the Meet Mike project, we used multiple single light references provided by ICT. These are useful to compare specular breakup quality and normals across the surface. And also helps show backlighting for ears as well as hair and facial fuzz illumination. And here are some of the results of our process on Meet Mike. On the left, you can see the reference photo, and on the right is the in-engine result, and it's really just the pupils of the eyes that give it away. Here's another result. And one more. We also set up light probes to capture real-world environments. It's important to have a variety of different environments to test. We place the HDR result into a dynamic skylight in the engine and use bent normals for proper shadowing. We then use Blueprint to sample the HDR light environment to create multiple light sources like a dome of spotlights in the engine. Here are some examples of our results with the reference photo on the right and the in-engine result, well, other way around actually. Yeah, sorry, it's the in-engine result on the left. I don't know my left from my right. So here's another example. Next, I would like to discuss some rendering features and improvements that will be coming to the engine in 4.20 that made these projects possible. The first is the addition of a double Beckman specular model. This gives a tighter and better looking fall off than the standard GGX model that we used previously. This actually consists of two separate specular lobes combined for the final result. So here you can see the first softer lobe. And here is the tighter second lobe. And combined, the two lobes give a nice approximation of microsurfacing of the skin. The next feature is called backscatter in lights. This is actually a forward scatter as light is scattered toward the camera. We just call it backscatter because it simulates backlighting from behind things like ears. Using a single scatter, we sample depths from shadow maps with exponential fall off. And then we run that through a phase function to get a little more depth in the scatter. Here is the result with the backscatter off. And here it is with backscatter on. I'll switch back and forth a few times so you can see the difference. The next feature is boundary bleed color. This, using scatter on characters' teeth was causing problems where light from the lips was blending into the mouth, causing halos around the teeth. If you look really closely, right at the edge of the character's lip, you can kind of see this right at the bottom of the teeth. It's like a faint white halo. With boundary bleed color, we can control how different materials scatter onto each other. So here is with boundary bleed color off. And here's with boundary bleed color on. And again, I'll flip back and forth a few times so you can see the difference. For the eyes, we also use boundary bleed color, just as we did with the teeth. However, we also added a separate normal slot to the material for an iris normal. We've had many developers ask us for this feature for the last couple of years. So here you can see the eye without an iris normal. And here's with an iris normal. And again, I'll flip back and forth. So the next feature we added is screen space irradiance. This provides a short distance dynamic self-irradiance. This helps remove CG blacks on the screen, and overall crevices and corners of the face, such as the nose and eye sockets, will feel more natural. So here's with self-irradiance off. And here's on. So next, we will cover some of the material techniques that we used in these projects. We split normal maps into two normals. The first is the micro normal, extracted from either scan data or from specular maps. This is for things such as pores and tiny details on the skin. The mesonormal is a medium detail for such like primary wrinkles on the skin. We animate these normals with poses to blend between each one. So here is 4 mesonormals that are blending along with the animation of the face. Here are the masks used to block out the locations for the mesonormal. Now these are being driven by animated poses from Andy's face. So the large stack of green nodes on the left-hand side is all animation pose data that's being sent in from the animation. And here's the result in motion. In fact, we ended up having to use this as a debug mode so that we could visualize how different maps were blending together, because the results were so subtle that we couldn't pick out what was going on. For roughness, we did not paint actual roughness maps. There is a technique in the engine that allows you to create a roughness map from a normal map. So we would start with a black texture, feed it the normal map, and that provides the roughness for us. Here you can see the roughness animated in the same way as the normal maps. Because the roughness was driven by the normal data, this allowed us to easily animate the roughness as well. This helped with transitions of roughness. where the skin was stretching or contracting in different poses and added a lot more realism to the character. We captured so much micro detail for Siren and Andy Serkis that we were able to drive wrinkle maps on the face. So there are about 120 individually blended masks, and we use the poses of the face to blend between each of these. And as I mentioned before, as we use normal maps to create specular, you can see how the animated normal maps gave us nice transitions for animated specular as her face makes different poses. We also added a little bit of Fresnel to the roughness to help approximate peach fuzz on the face. For skin, we use a constant value based on the index of refraction for actual skin. We do this because an artistically painted specular map is not physically accurate. So we just use a single value. However, we cannot ray trace every single point of the skin to test for specular occlusion. Maybe one day with the new ray tracing features we added to the engine, we'll be able to do this, but hardware will have to get a lot faster. Instead, we used a cavity map to generate, a cavity map generated in ZBrush to scale the specular value. We also bake the hair onto the specular occlusion map. This is done, again, because we cannot ray trace every possible occlusion point. Here is the final specular map for Andy. For the fuzz material, we tried to use the hair material in the Unreal Engine, but it's very difficult to get it to match. We ended up using a translucent material. This sampled scene color to provide the base color. So we start with that base color and then we darken the roots, we brighten the tips, and then sample the surface normal to add a little bit of detail. So here you can see the result of that peach fuzz shader. Next, we'll move on to the rigging for these characters. The Siren character was about 700,000 deforming vertices. Most of this was the vellus hair or peach fuzz on her face. This is very difficult because every hair must move perfectly with the face. Any single polygon can deform from numerous blend shapes, and that polygon might have multiple vellus hairs following it. To handle this, we tracked the accumulation of every single morph target and created a weighted average to drive the hairs. So the hairs are actually a separate mesh that covers the face. Other details that were animated include saliva and mouth wetness. Now let's talk a little bit about what is driving or controlling this animation. The Siren and Andy Serkis project pushed the limits of runtime rigging in the engine. 3Lateral's rig logic drives the same animation interface tools that a facial animator uses. That interface drives 725 blend shapes across 10 separate meshes. There are 185 rig inputs driving the face. And those are shown here with the little yellow facial controls. Those are the same controls that an animator would use in Maya to drive this animation themselves. So those controls, in turn, drive 760 outputs. That's each curve of the blend shapes, along with a few custom blend maps as well. The interesting part is that this rig runs at about 10 frames per second in Maya, which is kind of slow. We were able to get the exact same rig running in Unreal Engine in less than 1 millisecond. Now, because we had the entire rig working in Unreal, we were able to send the rig control data directly to the engine. This enabled us to very quickly iterate on animation, as the control data was only about 185 animated floats, as opposed to over 5,000 if we were to send all of the animated joint and blend data. So for GDC 2017, we showed off the radial basis function pose driver that we added to the engine for Paragon. We use this for a lot of different things in Paragon, like fixing arm deformations as elbows rotated. With Siren, we pushed the new pose driver to new limits. We had 30 driven poses, which relied on scan data. This means we had individual scans that represented her arm in one pose, and another pose, and another pose. And we used that data to control how she would animate. We created intermediate driven targets, as I mentioned, such as making multiple changes along the entire length of a joint rotation. And we also used multi-joint drivers to help control complex motions, such as neck deformations from the head. We do this by tracking the rotation of the head joint from the bone space of the top of the spine. Using the animation graph, we were able to use the pose driver to have multiple targets being driven by a single pose, such as control different parts of the neck or shoulders as the head rotates. Targets can also be blended by way of a curve, giving tremendous artistic control to how targets blend throughout the pose. So now let's talk a little bit about Livelink. More and more people are using Unreal Engine 4 real-time tech for live applications, things like virtual production or location-based entertainment. And the hardware for this runs from high-end pro equipment to increasingly affordable consumer solutions. We want to make it easy for developers and users to get their animation data into the engine. Now, our initial focus is on animation data, but we can stream arbitrary transform and parameter data. We've designed Livelink to be as flexible as possible. This diagram explains how the Livelink architecture works. Now, we've already released the Maya plugin for Livelink. So this uses the Unreal message bus. We wrote a plugin specifically for Maya to use the Unreal message bus and send data from Maya into the engine. if you had a DCC app of your own, you are able to write a plugin for that app that also uses the Unreal Engine message bus. If you have a piece of motion capture hardware, such as a Vicon setup or perhaps Leap Motion, you can create a plugin to handle that on the Unreal Engine side. Now, we have plans for this ourselves in our Livelink roadmap, which we will discuss in a moment. There are also plugin hooks if you have a completely different peripheral of your own to send your own data protocols into the engine. And this could really be anything, like if you wanted to drive a character or part of a scene using something like a MIDI keyboard. Here's an example of the Maya plugin in use. You can see as the Maya character updates, the in-engine version updates together alongside it. This is very useful for artists so they can see the final result of their work very quickly without having to go through the standard exporting procedures. Before the advent of Livelink, if an artist wanted to see what their character looked like in the engine, they would have to stop what they were doing, export it out of Maya or whatever their application was, and then import it into Unreal. But with Livelink, it's near instantaneous. At SIGGRAPH and GDC, we used Livelink in 2 different ways simultaneously. We sent Vicon data into Unreal to capture body motions. We also sent 3 lateral facial capture data to drive the character's face. All of this data was brought together in the character's animation blueprint, which you can see here. And here you see the 2 separate Livelink input nodes, each being fed into the final pose for the character. Here is an overview of our 2018 roadmap for Livelink. So as you can see, we have plans to bring in iKinema, Motion Builder, Vicon, and many more. We'll be hosting our Livelink plugins on the UE4 marketplace and working on documentation and examples to show you how to write your own plugins if you'd like to. And the source code for all plugins we release will be available. So thank you all very much for your time, and are there any questions? No? Okay. Thank you very much.